Hello friends, today we're going to be going through the basics of Ableton Live 12. So if you just downloaded the program, or maybe if you just want a refresher on where things are located, basic functions, hotkeys, etc., this is probably the video for you. Now, if you are just starting out and you're feeling a little overwhelmed, that's totally normal. Can 100% say though, this craft is worth sticking with. Your quality of life is going to skyrocket, and within 6-9 months a year, you're going to be so thankful that you stuck with it. Now, lastly, I just wanted to mention our mastermind community, which we opened up recently. There's already over 1,000 producers in there, and so if you're looking to connect with others and start building out your sample library, finding your sound, click that link below and hop in there for sure. So here we are in good old Ableton 12. And just to kick off, we're going to look at a few key global settings. So if you're on PC, you can press F11. If you're on Mac, you can press Control-Command-F. And now this top taskbar should appear for you. So if we navigate over to options and then scroll all the way down to the bottom to settings, you can also press Control period or Command period to have this menu pop up. You're going to have a few settings here, and we're just going to focus on the audio tab for now and make sure that we have the correct audio device selected. Essentially, if you just downloaded Ableton and you're not getting any sound, it's possible that you have this section here set up incorrectly. So right now you see that my audio device is set as Voicemeeter Virtual ASIO. That's because I'm shooting a video, so it's a little bit of a special situation. But generally when I'm working, I have Focusrite USB ASIO selected because off to my side, I have a Focusrite audio interface, meaning my headphones are plugged into it, my microphones, my keyboards, everything, and then that all flows into my laptop. If you're just using a laptop and headphones, you may want to choose ASIO for all. But just note, you're going to have to get the latest drivers from the site. That also applies to your audio interface. If you're having issues, you may need the latest drivers. The last thing I'll mention to you is that if you're using, say, just a laptop, maybe you lost your headphones, you may need to change your driver type from ASIO to MME/DirectX, and then you can choose your laptop speakers. Now, I'm going to go up to Theme and Colors and just mention, if you want, you could change the background color theme, get a little bit of a vibe going. Sometimes say I'm working on like a dark techno track, maybe I'll go dark mode. We'll keep it on default for now. Going up to display and input, also wanted to mention the zoom amount can be useful, depending on your monitor resolution. For example, when I got a 4K monitor, I boosted this a little bit so that I wasn't straining my eyes and could see all the text clearly. And then lastly, I will mention that, if you go over to plugins here, let's say you just got something like Serum or Omnisphere and you were really hoping to load it up, you may need to change your custom plugin folder. This is where Ableton scans for all of your third-party plugins. And so I have all of my third-party plugins in these folders here. And then when you just press the scan button up here, it's going to have them appear on the left side over here, which is bringing me to my next point. Off to the left here, we're going to talk about this in a second. This is essentially your library, your kitchen where everything is located, all of your sound, samples, presets. Just to quickly cap off this top menu bar though, if we navigate over to File, we can start a new project with Control-N. We can save our set or save as with Control-S, Control-Shift-S. And then once we've finished our song, we can render it with Control-Shift-R. Now, the good news about this top menu bar is you're going to know most of these functions via the hotkeys within a couple weeks of using Ableton. So copy and paste, for example, I rarely go up to edit and copy and paste. I just press Control-X or Control-C. So if you're just starting out in Ableton and trying to learn the hotkeys and kind of where things are located, this can be a nice spot, right? If you're trying to navigate around and forget where a menu is, go to Navigate and it's going to show you how to pop it up. Lastly, I just wanted to mention, if you go over to Help, you can quick navigate to the manual here. If you have questions on anything I'm saying or want to dive deeper, the manual is obviously the gold standard, and so you can dig deeper there. Our friends at Ableton have also been really nice and given us this bottom left info pane, which basically gives you information on anything that you hover over. So if I hover over this 128 number, for example, it's telling us in the bottom left that this is our project tempo. So we're writing a house track, we go to 128. If we're writing drum and bass, we could go up higher. And so this is really nice, right? When you're starting out, you're not sure where the button is. You just hover over this button. Now it's telling us in the bottom left, this is the play button. So we can start listening to our project. Now, we don't have any sounds in here. So let's start getting some sounds in here, start getting some audio. I'm going to be working in what's called the arrangement view. There's also, if I press tab, you can go over to what is called the session view. And they're essentially two different ways of working. I prefer the arrangement view because it's a little more visual. You know, you're kind of painting your song in this landscape here. But the session view can also be useful, and I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the differences between those later. But a lot of times, if you want to kind of just quickly experiment and whip up ideas, session view can be nice. Or if you're, say, doing a live performance, people will use it to trigger stuff on the fly. But for now, we're going to be working in arrangement view. So now we're ready to talk about the browser section off to the left here. And again, this is your complete library. This is your producer's kitchen with everything. So your samples, your plugins, presets, everything that comes with Ableton or that you've downloaded is going to be over here to the left. And so one way to work here is to just go to all and Control F. So we can just search here in the top bar and look for a kick, for example. And we can just preview the kicks. Let's get a Mr. Bill kick into our project. We're just going to drag it in. And now we have a little audio file here. And so we could zoom in on it a little bit if we wanted to press Control scroll wheel. Or you could press the plus and minus keys on your keyboard. Or you could just press Z and zoom all the way in on it. If you want to zoom back out, you can press X. And so we can listen back to our kick now. Or we can just press the space bar to listen back, which is what most people do. And so we could just keep going with this if we want, right? We could just search for a top loop now. Drag stuff in. Now we've got a kick and a top loop. And so we've got two channels now off to the right. We're going to talk about this section in a minute. This is the mixer section. I'm going to press Control R and rename this as a kick. And I'm going to press Control R and rename this as a top loop. You could also right-click on the channel and rename. So we could keep going with this. We could just keep searching and dragging in sounds into our project, see what sticks. But let's keep talking about the rest of the sections here. So we're currently searching through all. If we want, we could just search through drums, for example. And now there's all these drum kits from Ableton. We could drag one in. 909 core kit. And this is going to give us a collection of drum sounds. We could go to instruments if we want. Operator is a pretty popular one. If you go and you open this menu, it's going to give you a bunch of presets. These are all the operator presets. So let's say we wanted some keys. We could drag these into our project. And now we are going to have some keys. Now, this is a MIDI track, meaning it's a little different from these first two channels. These are audio tracks, meaning you can see the waveform. You can just play back the audio. With a MIDI track, basic sine keys here, in order to get any audio, you have to create what is called a MIDI clip. And we're going to be diving into audio and MIDI a little deeper. But if I just drag, say, 2 bars of time length, the top here is showing us this is 2 bars, and you press Control-Shift-M, we've now created a MIDI clip. So this is what a MIDI clip looks like, and we could call this our sine keys. And then when we go to our MIDI clip and we press this headphone button here to enable sound, we could start writing a melody if we want by just drawing in notes. Now, we'll start sketching out a track a bit later, but just to cap off the browser section, let's keep going. There's also audio effects. So if I wanted, I could drag in some reverb onto our sine keys. Again, I'm just going down, checking out the presets. Let's get cathedral reverb onto our sine keys. Now let's solo it and listen to that. Super ethereal now. And so we could keep going through all of these, but I'm going to, for now, mention this filtering section, which is an interesting thing in Live 12. You know, if you go to the filter section, you can basically go back to your library and look for certain sound types. So say, for example, we wanted to only look at a certain type of sound. We could go to the drop-down menu and only look for leads, or we could only look for strings. And you can also add custom tags. So let's say you're working with a sound here. You could right-click on it and add your own custom tags, right? My name is Sam, so I might have a category here that's Sam's leads. And so you can start tagging your sounds like this and organizing them. Definitely very important to keep an organized sample library. Last thing I wanted to mention in the browser section before we move on is the bottom left here where you have your places. So you're going to have certain packs here. A lot of these come with Ableton. You're also going to have your user library, which is any custom stuff that you've saved. And you can add a folder here. For example, let's say you just got a third-party sample pack and you wanted to load it up. You could just add folder, and then you are going to be able to choose it, and it's going to pop up in Ableton. So I have SJK patches here, which is my initials. And within that, I have all of my sample packs that I've ever downloaded. And so you can start organizing it and customizing it however you'd like. So now let's work with what we have in here for a moment and specifically focus on our audio channels. And again, these two are audio channels because we can see the waveforms displayed. If we look at our kick, we can see that it starts loud and then decays to silence. And so let's get a 1-bar loop going. So how long is 1 bar? Well, up at the top, we can see that 1 bar would end here. And this is also sliced evenly into quarters for us. So we know that our kick should be this long and that we should have 4 kicks. I'm just clicking and dragging and holding Control Shift, by the way. You can also click this file and press Control D to paste them over. And so now we have 4 kicks on the downbeats. And if we look at the bottom, this is going to be roughly almost 2 seconds of audio. So if we turn on our metronome up here, it's going to count on the downbeats for us at 128 BPM. Excuse me. So I'm going to solo the kick. So now we've got a 1-bar loop of 4 kicks. And so let's get our top loop now. Let's see how it's sounding right now. So it's sounding weird. And that's because it's not in time. Meaning if we look at this file here, CS top loop 10-140, this top loop is actually at 140 BPM. So in order to fix this, we can double click on the file and we can press warp here. And then in our BPM section, I'm just going to type in 140. And so we're going to talk about this section, the clip view, in a moment. But as you saw there, if I Control Z, Control Y, undo and redo, this is snapping to the grid lines here, right? We just talked about these markers. Now you can see that this downbeat is on the grid. So we're going to go back here to the top loop and we're just going to drag it out all the way because it's now a different length, and listen back. So now we've got a simple little 1-bar loop. And by the way here, I activated this loop brace up here by pressing Control L so that we could just loop this section of audio. And so let's say we wanted to edit our top loop a little bit. Maybe we don't like how it sounds at the start of the loop. Well, we could just click and drag to highlight a piece and press Control E. And now we've chopped it into 2 pieces here. If we want, we can now mute this first piece by pressing 0. Or you could also turn it back on with 0. So I'm going to do that over here as well. I'm going to mute this. And we could do this in other spots too. We could make a little bit more of a stuttery, choppy vibe to our loop if we want, and listen back. And so you can get very creative with moving around and manipulating audio in Ableton. As you see, I'm hovering over the center of this clip and I have your traditional mouse cursor. But if I go towards the top, you'll see that it turns into a hand, and now I can move stuff around. And you can also go to the top corners here and it will turn into a bracket. So now we can just drag it either left or right, and we could go back to square one if we want. This is what we originally had. Control Z to get back to the stuttery vibe, Control Y to go forward, Control Z to go back, Y to go forward, G to go back. And so this is a good way to work. Just keep chopping stuff, moving it around, and make stuff your own. If I zoom in on this part of the loop with Z, you can get a little bit of a more surgical view. Sometimes when you're chopping up audio, you get these weird clicks at the start. And so you can fix that with fades. So now I'm fading in the audio. I'm clicking and dragging in this little box here. And so that's going to get rid of any clicks. Or let's say we wanted to make a little bit of like a whoosh or kind of a reverser. Now we can do that. Versus this. You hear how the audio is fading in. So this is very important as well when you're working with something like, maybe if this was a reverser at the end, you could kind of dial it in how you want it to sort of, I'm just clicking and dragging these boxes, by the way. If you wanted our reverser to come in like this, we could, or we have it come in just at the end. So fades are important, and then also crossfades. So if we go, this clip is right next to this clip, we can drag this box over, and now it's crossfading between the two clips, so you have a nice clean sound. And so this is a really good way to work. Let's say we just zoom back out and we've got our new loop here. Well, we can just paste it over by highlighting everything, pressing Control D, probably the most used shortcut in Ableton. And over here, we could highlight this portion of audio and we could press Control J or Command J to consolidate it into a new loop. And so now maybe we would name this. We would say Fire Top Loop. And, it's a good way to stay organized, keep renaming stuff. Now we could call this Fire Top Loop over here. So now I'm going to right click here and insert an audio track. You can also press Control T to get a new fresh channel. And let's get another loop in here. So we could Control F for top loop and see what catches our ear. Now, another way of searching is the way I flashed you before. If we X out of this and we go to drums, for example, we could use filtering to find a drum loop and top drum loop. Now, just note that this is going to be only sounds that have been tagged as top drum loop, and I have not tagged any of my sounds or stuff from all the sample packs I've downloaded, so this is only showing stock Ableton top loops right now that have already been tagged using this new system in Live 12. Hi-hat, duck hunt, sounding good. We're going to drag it in. And if we just double click, it's going to pop up the good old clip view here. And so right now my cursor is a magnifying glass. If I scroll up towards the gray bar here, it becomes a double arrow. And I can now resize the clip view. So if I want to go full screen, I can, and then press Shift Tab to go back to the arrangement view. Shift Tab again to go back to the clip view. Let's keep it with kind of the half and half. And let's see how we're sounding within the context of our loop that we already have. Again, highlight with your mouse and then Control L to have the loop brace here shift over. So it's sounding kind of wonky, and that's because it's out of time. So similar to the issue we had before, this is at 84 BPM. And so we're going to need to warp it. We're going to press warp down here, and we're going to type in 84. And press enter. And so now you can see that it's snapped to the grid lines right here and right here. Grid lines are the vertical lines in the background here, and these are your beat markers, right? So you can make sure you're in time. If you want to have more or less detail with those, you can press Control 1 or Control 2 to add more or take some away. And so now we've got something in time. Let's listen again. It might be a touch loud, so we could bring down our gain slider. You could start messing around with the pitch. Maybe if you want a little bit of a higher, brighter sound. Sounded pretty good. And right now we're using the Beats warp mode. If I click this little drop-down menu, you'll see that we have some other options. The Beats mode is made specifically for warping drums or things that have transients. Transients meaning you can see them here, a little bit of decay in the waveform versus something like a pad or an ambience that has more of a consistent waveform. The tones, texture, complex pro, you'll learn different uses for different ones and definitely dive deeper into the manual to see what Ableton recommends, but you can get creative with it, right? So for me, if I'm doing, like say, warping a vocal, I like complex. If I'm doing something a little bit more creative, like maybe stretching out an ambience and making it 2 minutes long, I might go texture or tones, or even repitch to get something completely different. And so this is another way to work around and sort of make a loop creatively in the clip view, right? You have some quick functions if I want to make it shorter or longer. We can make it 2x the length. We could reverse it. We could also, just basically add warp markers. So see this little triangle? If I hover over it, I can press Insert Warp Marker. And now we can kind of play around with the timing of this. We could add a warp marker here as well if we only wanted to maybe have a little quick hit at the start. It's out of time right now. As you can see, it's a little bit off the grid line, so make sure if things are sounding wonky that you're in time. And now, just a quick note on being in time. Of course, things don't have to be perfectly on the grid. You know, we're not machines making music, so as long as it sounds good to you, you can go on with it. And so that pretty much wraps it up for the clip view. But just know that you can get very creative with morphing samples. And, you know, as far as I'm concerned, we started off with something, that sounded more like this. Let's go back. And now we ended up with something very different. Well, we were on +7 semitones, not 10, but... Alrighty, friends, so I've done just a little bit of project cleanup. I've consolidated our sounds into a nice clean 1-bar loop. I've deleted a couple channels that we weren't really using so far. And never underestimate the importance of staying organized as you work, right? It's easy to quickly get lost in the sauce. All of a sudden, you've got 30, 40 channels and you don't know what's what. So at that point, it's best to usually just pause and go back and do a little bit of cleanup. So we're ready to talk about MIDI clips now. So if we right-click over here, we can head on down to Insert MIDI Track. Now we've got a MIDI channel to work with. And if we click and drag, we can choose how long we'd like our clip to be. And then right-click and go down to Insert Empty MIDI Clip. Or you can press Ctrl-Shift-M, which is what I usually do. And now your piano roll will pop up. And so you can resize this, again, with the gray bar here if we want to go half and half versus full screen. And so this is going to allow us to produce sound in our project once we add something like a synthesizer over here. So I'm going to add Operator, which is a very popular synth that comes with a Live 12 suite, I believe. I've dragged it onto our channel. And so now when we go back to our piano roll, sine waves, little sounds. So if this blue headphone icon is off, you're going to get nothing. So just be very aware of that. If you're not getting a sound, just make sure this is on. And so let's get a bass line in our track now and get a little bit of a groove going. So if we go through the hot swap preset function here in the top right, this button in Operator, it's going to show all the presets for Operator here. Look how many there are. So there's everything you can imagine here, right? Bells. Look at this. Miami pluck. Nasal chorus keys. Lots of different options. And so let's just get a bass line in here. We've got bright bass, burned bass. We'll double click and bring that in. The operator view is not showing because these two buttons need to be enabled down here. And so let's just solo our kick and our bass and see which note catches our ear for the root note of our track. I'm liking the A sharp. So let's just draw in some notes by double clicking. And let's go back for a second to the operator preset. And I'm just going to filter down a bit because I don't love the way it's sounding in the mids and the highs. So now it's sounding a little cleaner. It's more like a sub bass. And we can go back to our piano roll. And if we want, we could just start drawing in notes quickly by just double clicking like this. Or we could enable the pencil icon up here. You can also press Control-B, and some people remember the shortcut as Bencil. And then we could just start one click to add notes. And right now, you're seeing that there are these purple channels here. This is because I have C major enabled up here as my scale. I'm going to deselect that because I've just selected A sharp as our root note. And so now we just have the grayscale lanes. And so this is one way to work. Just kind of draw notes and see what happens. Let's just stick with a simple bass line pattern for now. So I'm going to click and drag to choose these notes and then press delete. You can also press Control-A to grab all the notes. So let's say I wanted to go up an octave, for example. You can press Shift up arrow. And there are some options over here similarly to the clip view, right? If we wanted to make this twice as fast or a little bit slower, you could do the 2x over here. You could press legato if you want the notes to extend in length. You could reverse your pattern. It's not reversing right now because it's on perfectly on the off beats, but if this one was here, it would reverse. And so lots of options here. I have a tutorial out on the transform and generate tools as well, which are great for sparking inspiration if you're not feeling super creative with your MIDI patterns. There is also velocity down here, which is volume. So we could press randomize and get some randomness in our volume. There is also the grid size, right? So if we right click, similarly to the arrangement view, right now we're on 16ths. If we wanted 30 seconds, we could go with 30 seconds, and now we can draw in 30-second notes. And so if you right click here, you'll see, again, a lot of these, don't be overwhelmed because as you work with the piano roll, you'll just know the shortcuts, right? For example, zoom to fit and zoom out, Z and X, same as the arrangement view. So it can seem overwhelming, but I guarantee you within a couple weeks of using live, most of these buttons here, you're going to know via the shortcuts. And so let's just get a simple little bass line pattern going. You can raise the velocity by just dragging up. That's fine for now. And so now we've got our bass line of 1 bar loop. And we are going to be able to extend this out now, right? And refine it a little bit. But we've got a little bit of a groove going. So let's get it, kind of back in context with our other sounds. Let's bring in the hi-hat duck hunt. I'm going to bring down the volume over here. This is the mixer section now, which we can touch on. Bringing down the volume over here of hi-hat duck hunt. So I'm not loving how the fire top loop is sounding right this moment, so I'm just going to mute it by pressing 0. We can perhaps massage it a little bit and bring it back later. But this mixer section over here is a quick way to work, right? If I just click a yellow button, I can turn the kick off. I can turn it back on. If I want, I could solo it by clicking the solo button. If I want to solo multiple channels, I can hold Control and click as many channels as I want. The blue bar is your volume, so let's get our bass line a little louder. And then you also have panning, right? So if we wanted our hat to be a little bit panned to the left or right. And then there are also these send buttons here. So let's say we wanted to add a little bit of reverb to our hat. Well, these send channels down here relate to reverb and delay, which relates to the A slot and the B slot here. So we could just crank up the reverb. You can hear it now is a little more reverby versus that. And so this is your mixer section. This is going to be also where you do things like record in sounds from your microphone. If I add a new audio channel and I solo this and then I press the record button, as long as you have this drop-down menu set up correctly, for example, if you have your microphone flowing into channel 1 in your audio interface, then you could also have channel 1 selected here, and then it's going to record in your microphone when you press the record button up here. So if I was talking right now, which I am, it should record. Which I am, it should record. No, which I am, it should record. No, which I am, it should record. No, which I am, it should record. There's our vocal hook. Just kidding about the vocal. We can delete that for now and maybe get a real lead vocal in a bit later. So now we've got 1 bar and we can extend this out to 8 bars, 1 full phrase of electronic music. So I'm going to press Control scroll wheel to zoom out. I'm going to select all these clips and press Control D to paste them over. If you had a ton of channels and it was a bit tough to select them all like that, you could just activate the loop brace with Control L so that it's gray at the top, and then press Control A to select everything underneath the loop brace. Then you can press Control D and paste it over. So we could just keep doing this to 8 bars. And now we have 1 8-bar loop. We could make a little variation. We could call this baseline A and make this baseline B. These are now two separate clips. So if I go into baseline B, we could maybe mute this note, you know, make some of the volumes a little different to have a little bit of groove, maybe something like this. And so we could just grab these two by holding Shift and clicking, and then again, Control D to just paste it over. So now let's listen back. So we've got a basic 8-bar loop, and this is one way to work. You could just keep adding channels. You could add some vocals, some melodies, and have one big super loop, and then go back later and rearrange it into sections, you know, your intro, your drop, your breakdown. So let's get some additional sounds in here and talk a little bit about audio effects over here and MIDI effects as well. And so I'm going to search for something that could just kind of hit at the start of a drop, like a synth stab, and we're going to see what catches our ear. This one could work. Let's just bring it in, drag it in, and pitch it around a little bit until we find the right tone. I'm going to go into warp. I'm going to try complex mode. Let's drag it out a ton by holding Shift, and as long as you have this bracket popping up here, you can just drag it out to make a super long little stab here. Now it's going to sound pretty different. Let's add some more reverb by searching for reverb. So we could drag in the hybrid reverb. We could search for some distortion now in our audio effects. Bring in a little vinyl distortion and see how this sounds. We'll call this our stab. Let's solo it for a second and just listen with some distortion. Let's try a different type of distortion. Let's try acid distortion. Mute the vinyl. Let's try a shorter stab. Now that's sounding a little bit better to me. So it's creating a little bit of atmosphere, right? A little bit of reverb at the start of the drop. So maybe thinking longer term in our track, we'd have a big build and then our first drop would be maybe just the kick bass and the stab. And so audio effects over here on the left can be a great way to get creative. If I exit out of our distortion search, we can see all of the audio effects right here that come with Ableton Suite. Amp, you've got distortion, you have some auto panning, filtering, right? This is probably one of the most common ones, auto filter as well as EQ. And you can get really creative here. You know, if we wanted to bring in, say, maybe Corpus, which gives you like these cool metallic-y sounds, we could solo our stab and hot swap again through the Corpus presets and see what catches our ear. Pipe resonator. See how different that sounds? If you click this yellow button here, we can turn it off. Let's keep that for now. That sounded pretty nice. And let's go on to talk about MIDI effects. So MIDI effects, if we go over to this menu here, are similar to audio effects, except that they can only be dragged onto a MIDI channel. So right now, this would only be our bass line. So if we wanted to drag something like the arpeggiator onto our bass line, we could do that and see how it sounds. See how it's creating those little arps right now? I'm not going to go into detail on the arpeggiator right now, but if we wanted to, we could use this as a little bit of a layer or maybe kind of a pluck or possibly a lead. So I'm just going to press Control D to duplicate this. And our original bass line, I'm going to delete the arpeggiator. And this one, we'll call this our arp. And we could try to make a little bit of a subtle layer. So this is following the same pattern as our bass line, but it's this little arp thing now. If we wanted to go up an octave, we could grab the pitch MIDI effect. We could go up 12 semitones or 1 octave. We could go up another one. And this is more of a plucker lead, so we could grab our EQ, which is an audio effect. So it can only be inserted after the instrument. So if you're having trouble dragging stuff in, Ableton will give you notifications down here. So I'm dragging this over here. And I may have misspoke before. I mean, MIDI effects can only go onto MIDI channels, but some audio effects can go on any channel. So now we have this. And maybe this would be muted for our first drop and something that comes in after the next 8 bars. So let's see how we're sounding now. Actually, I'll turn it back on. Maybe I'll mute every other for the little tiny ARP. We'll call it tiny ARP. And get a new color. Pretty good for now. So I just wanted to pause for a second and kind of zoom out and think a little bit higher level. Right now we've got this 8-bar loop. And so what we might do is sort of just zoom out into the arrangement view. And we might give ourselves some space, right? So I'm going to drag this over here and I'm going to label at the top, drop 1. We can start thinking about the arrangement of our track. We can call this drop 1B. And this one, drop 1A. By the way, I'm just clicking and then pressing set to add a marker. You can also click it and then press delete to remove it. And it's good sometimes, instead of just, working on the toe of your track, zooming in here on this node and changing around these settings on the arpeggiator, think about like, what's going on with my track? What am I actually going to do? Right? As a producer, sometimes we need to think high level. How can I actually finish the song? What's kind of the face of the track, etc. And so maybe what I would do is paste the hats over here and mute them in the first section. Same thing with the ARPs. Maybe I'll just delete them from here. And we can, start to think about what we want to do for our intro. So this could be our intro. And then after 8 bars, we would have our build. And then drop, right? Pretty common arrangement in electronic music. So let's build out a little bit of a skeleton for our intro and build, and maybe tie together some of the knowledge we've learned so far and talk a little bit about automation envelopes as well. So what I like to do sometimes is paste over my kick and high pass it for your intro. So I'm going to search for the filter, the auto filter, and drag it onto my kick channel. And automation envelopes are things that appear when you click a knob and then press A. Right now, you see this red line here, and these menus here, auto filter and frequency. So in the auto filter effect, I could choose any of these options here and automate it. So frequency, right now, we're going to say that we want it to be at the drop full. And well, this would be a low pass, so let's change it to high pass. At the drop, we want it to be at 0, essentially, if we listen. Matter of fact, we're just going to automate the plugin on and off by clicking the on and off knob and pressing A. And so now the device will just turn off at the drop. And so in our intro, we could high pass our kick. Let's dial in where we want it to be high passed. Maybe we could do something similar for our bass line. Paste over our bass line. And I'm just going to copy and paste this filter. I'm going to rename it high pass. I'm going to copy and paste it onto the bassline channel. Let's see how the bassline's sounding now. So maybe we could tease our groove in our intro a little bit. Let's also add some reverb to our kick so that it's a little bit more of an ethereal vibe. So hybrid reverb. See how we're sounding now. I'm also going to add a low pass to the kick just for the intro and have it be off at the drop. And now let's find something like a vocal that is going to be a face of our track. So let's just search for vocal in my sample library, which is SJK patches. By the way, if you press add folder here, you can add something like a third-party sample pack, and then it will pop up here. So now anything titled vocal is going to show up in my sample library. So we've got vocal loops here. This one's pretty cool. So I'm going to drag this into our project. And similar to before, I'm going to warp it. I like complex for vocals, but definitely experiment around. And if we zoom in with Z, we can see this is at 136 BPM. So I'm going to type 136 and press enter. And so now we've got a little bit of an intro vocal. See how we're sounding. So now let's get a snare build in here for the next section. And one thing I like to do is kind of stay organized. If I have all my drums in similar colors, whites, grays, it's easier for me. So I might call this snare build and just search for snare build. So I think this one has some potential. We can massage it a little bit. We're going to warp it again. And for drums, I like using the beats mode. You can, if you click this little singular arrow and then drag down this blue knob here, or this blue slider rather, you can make it pluckier. Let's add the reverb from our kick to the snare build and automate it over time. So it's at 30% dry wet right now. 0% would be dry. 100% completely reverby. And let's press A and have it go from 30% to 100% by the end. So now let's do something similar with our vocal. I'm going to paste it over with just Control D. And I'm just going to copy that reverb and paste it onto the vocal so that our vocal becomes more verby over the course of these 8 bars. So we can see our hybrid reverb, the dry wet raising. Let's see how this sounds. So now we can get a riser in here. I'm just going to search for riser, 8-bar riser. Let's drag it in. So you see right now it's at a different BPM, so it's not 8 bars. I'm just going to warp it on my favorite complex mode, and I'm going to drag it out to be that long. And we are going to also tease our bass line a little bit. Let's duplicate the bass line. And I'm going to bring the pattern over. Except I'm going to find a different element here, something to create a little bit of tension in our build. So let's try to find some type of pluck. Chirp pluck. Let's see how we're sounding. I'm going to drag it onto burned bass. We're going to call this our tension pluck. Tension, build, pluck. Not sure how it'll sound, but that's not bad. Let's get the reverb chain onto the pluck as well. So with the bass line, we could have our bass line maybe opening up a little bit so that we're sort of teasing that the low frequencies are coming in. Let's see how this sounds all together right now. Maybe everything will just disappear. A lot of times this is your turnaround where you can have a little bit of a vocal. You know, you hear all the DJs these days putting, you know, Trump or whoever before the drop, and we'll have only our vocal playing before the drop. So I'm going to mute everything. And let's see how this sounds. So it's a little bit quiet compared to the drop, so we can just fix that by raising the sound of everything a little bit. Now let's listen back. So I'm not sure I love the synth stab, so I'm gonna mute that. And we'll also make the vocal go back to being completely dry right before the drop. And perhaps then we can have some vocal chops in the drop. So we could spend another hour or two and keep building this track out, but I wanted to leave you guys with some tips that I think are very important. Initially, I know I said I'd go into arrangement for session view, but I'm going to leave that to you guys. I'm a bit biased and I don't want to cloud your judgment, so definitely look into both. But I wanted to mention some things that I think are very important. So first of all, let's say you really love this bass line and you don't want to lose it. You might want to use it in a future project. Well, just give it a memorable name. Maybe we'll call it Fire Bassline, and I'll use my initials. Then you can just drag it into your user library over here. And so then if you're in a new Ableton project, say we just started a fresh project, we can just Control F for Fire Bassline and drag it in. You can just drag in channels, and now we have the same exact thing here. So this is a really good way, instead of just building out your sample library, which is all your audio files, you can also build out your clip library, drag in MIDI, right? Or drag in anything that you've made that you might want to use in the future. So I do this all the time. It's nice because I believe Live 11 clips are compatible with Live 12. So if you made those in Live 11, you can drag them into Live 12. You can also just go back to an old project and bounce out the best stuff and save it to your sample library. I definitely recommend doing that if you're, maybe you're a little stuck, you're not feeling super inspired. Just have a session where you go in to say this bass line. I'll create a new audio channel, solo this, and route it so that this is recording the bass line. I'm going to press the record button here, and then the record button here, and now it's going to record the bass line. And this is nice because then we could have this in audio, and we could call this Fire Bassline. Press Control J, and then just drag it over into our sample library. So that's another good way to work. In addition, you'll see that if I search for something like an EQ and drag it onto my bass line, it's a low cut at 130. And I have that saved as my default setting. So let's say you wanted a softer low cut at, 60. You could right click any device and save as default preset. So now anytime we bring in EQ8, it's going to be that setting. And this applies to any plugin. So let's say you were using Ableton's amp for distortion and you found a preset that you really like and you want to use it on all your basses. You can just right click and save as default preset. You can also save project templates. So let's say you had a color coded situation like this with drums, vocal, bass line. You could go up to file and you could save template. Save live set as template. In addition, there are drum kits. So if we search for a drum kit, we can drag it into our project. And we can create a MIDI clip if we want. So Control-Shift-M. And then if we solo our drum kit, we can get sounds. There's a lot of really nice stock Ableton drum kits. So if you want to create a quick little loop, this can be a good way. You can just start drawing in MIDI notes in each channel. If you have something like a MIDI keyboard or an Ableton push, you can also just press those little rectangles and play it in. Alrighty, y'all, that's it for today. I hope you guys learned a bit about the basics of Ableton and are ready to start making some awesome music. Other than that, if you guys have any questions, drop it below and we will try to respond to everything. And please join our mastermind community. Start connecting with others, start building out your sample library, etc. And if you're feeling overwhelmed and you're just starting out, that's totally normal. Just take it day by day, step by step, and I guarantee within 6, 9, 12 months, your quality of life will have skyrocketed, because production is an awesome thing. It's a tough trade, but it is an awesome, awesome trade that you will not regret learning, and I really hope that you stick with it. All right, y'all. Peace.